So next thing after that, now the exhaust is all done, I'm starting to fine tune things in and around the engine. My cold air kit uh, or piping has a let's see, I guess it's an intake air temperature sensor that was kind of interfering with the side of the engine bay right here. So I thought I would sort of beat a blister into it and clean it up, but it ended up tearing the metal right here where I had that seam from this panel that I put in, and I decided I needed to do something different. So I went to I looked at buying like a pre-made metal blister. You can buy them for your hood, but they're big. I couldn't find a little one. So I went to Walmart and bought just a little $1 ceramic bowl, and I filled it with fiberglass. And I took that out and cleaned it up, cut it, grinded it a little bit. Then I traced that onto the area I wanted to fix, cut that out, put that little bowl in there, and then taped it on the inside. And then on the outside, this is under the wheel, I glassed it all in there. And in the end, it looked like that. I mean, it looks better when it's all painted and it's all black, so you don't even really notice it. But it gave me a little bit of extra room I needed right there. So with that being done, I was ready to prep the entire engine bay for paint, the final paint. So I started cleaning it up, sanding everything, seam sealing everything. That's what all this is. Uh, Initially, I used a seam sealer that kind of dried hard and it was awful. I used it on my hood because I seam sealed the underside of the hood. And I ended up removing all that and finding a better seam sealer, which this yellow stuff is. It stays nice and flexible, but it's made for cars. So I like it a lot. And then I painted it. This is a hot rod black. Nice color. It's got a little bit of a shine to it. It's very high hiding because it's black. So, most of the stuff you wouldn't really want to see just kind of disappears into the background. It transitions into the black on the bottom of the car just fine. So I was pretty happy with it. It came out really good. With that done, I'm ready to put the engine in sort of for the final time, but I got a couple things to deal with on it. One is this. This is a heat exchanger that is attached to the bottom of the bottom side of the engine, and it's where the oil filter mounts. I didn't have room for this. I didn't have room certainly for the oil filter. It's where the coolant and the oil exchange heat, and so this thing is attached to the radiator and has the oil filter on it because it has oil circulating through it. That's another picture of what it looks like. And when you remove it, this is the space where it mounts. So I took the gasket and I traced it onto a piece of paper. And then I drew that in CAD. And I had that water jetted in, this is a 3/4 inch piece of aluminum, and this is a 3/8 inch piece of aluminum. So I had these two pieces water jetted out of aluminum plate. And then this is an aluminum bung. And when all is said and done, it looks like this. There's a gasket between the two pieces. I tapped this hole right here for that bolt. The other holes are through holes that go into the block of the engine. And the installed version looks like this. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts that go into the engine, and then this bolt just goes into the lower part. I tapped a hole in the side here for the oil pressure sending unit, and I tapped these two holes for these two AN fittings that go up to the remote oil filter. So all in all, it worked out great. It hasn't leaked. It has performed perfectly, and one less issue. Next picture is the fully assembled, painted and assembled front suspension. So this is the finished version of it, without the tire on. It came out pretty good. I mean, not pretty good. It came out really good. There are a lot of fancier versions of this. You can get billet aluminum, tubular upper and lower control arms, and you know, coil over shocks, just really fancy stuff. Mine's a daily driver, and I wanted it to look and behave like a daily driver. The other thing I did is I went ahead and mocked up and assembled everything on the front end. So for the first time in forever, all of that stuff is assembled and put together. This is all in preparation for painting the car. While I'm tweaking some things in the engine bay, that's already painted. So, I've got mechanical things to do in there, but nothing really cosmetic. So I'm still working on the outside of the car, and mocking all this up is part of that. Right when I was about ready to paint, or thought I was, I realized that my seats were going to be a big problem. I had bought seats from a 2007 Mustang. This is what they look like on the bottom. This is what the original seat looks like. And there's a significant difference between the two. The guy I bought them from, I told him what I was going to do, and he's like, "Oh yeah, they'll fit in there just fine." They don't even come close to fitting in there just fine, but they will fit in there if you're willing to modify them. So the first thing I did is these 4 mounting points that were on the 2007 seats, I removed these rivets holding them together. So it looked like that when I was done. And now I've got basically a straight runner, which is what I need. It's very similar to the original Mustang. In fact, I think the width of that runner is very, very close to the width of the original Mustang runner, which was nice for lining up with the holes down below. And I set the seat on there and determined how much I needed to lower it. This is the line of my initial cut. And I cut a bunch of that material out. This is in the very important floor platform that I mentioned earlier. So I am cutting out a structural part of the car and having to put it back together in a way that still maintains some structural integrity. The first challenge, though, was how do I figure out where the mounting points need to be? So I took some bar stock, like 1/8-inch bar stock, and cut these plates, and took some threaded rod, and underneath the floor of the car, there's another seat kind of platform. It's a reinforcing thing that's underneath there, and it's got a hole in it, and it gets a little rubber seal, but it's the hole you use to access your seat folds. So what I did is I took one of those plates that I made with a hole in it, put it underneath the car, and then another plate that is down inside that hole that's on top of that reinforcing area. And then the threaded rod goes up through those, and 2 nuts hold it all together. So that gives me 4 pieces of threaded rod that are rigidly attached to the car in the 4 locations I need them. And then I put a piece of angle iron across each one that I cut to a specific length for the seat tracks, with a nut underneath the angle and on top of the angle. So now that gives me the ability to take those 2 pieces of angle and adjust them like this. Any way I want. I can independently move all 4 corners. So with the car level and with the front of those 2 things generally level, and what looked to me like the same angle going down as far as the rake going back to the car, I would set the seat in there, see where it rocked sitting on those 4 points, and adjust accordingly. And then once I got it to where the seat was sitting on there and not rocking, then I could adjust the whole thing up, down, forward, backwards, whatever I needed to do. And I kept messing with it until I got the seat perfect. I would set it in place, get in there, sit on it, see how it felt. I had to be careful that I wasn't bumping into the rocker panel with any part of the seat controls, and make sure I still had room over here. So there's a lot involved, but in the end, it all worked out great. After I got those 2 set to where I wanted them, I just tacked them in place and started welding everything back together, taking those pieces of rod out, welding in a basically a floor underneath here. And in the case of the driver's seat, that thing had to drop below the tracks because the mechanism for the electric seat hangs below the tracks. So this side was a little more challenging than the other side, but in the end, I just cut pieces, held them in place with magnets, got it all welded in place, and in the end, it all looked like that, and it was very, very strong. So then what I did is I put 4 bolts, one in each corner. There are 7/16 bolts. I just stuck them down in there with the heads sitting up, and then I put a little dab of 5-minute epoxy on one of the bolt heads. Then I set the seat in place, waited for 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes, took it out. Now I've got 1 bolt epoxy to the seat track, exactly where it needs to be. And then I welded right through that. Now that bolt is permanently attached. Then I repeated the process for the other 3 bolts, which was a great way of determining where those bolts needed to go and getting them installed. Now, though, if you go underneath and take the nuts off, that seat just lifts right out of there perfectly. You don't have to fight it or anything. It does great. Then I repeated the entire process on the passenger side, same exact way. And in the end, it worked out great. The seats fit in there perfectly. They look great. I've got video of the interior that you can look at, and I was really, really happy with it. So next thing came the body, wrapping it up for paint. The bulk of the body work is done. I went around the car marking and circling little areas that I had banged into, or areas that I had modified and needed to work on. I had shaved my door handles, so this is all one big metal patch. So making all that perfect was really important. I had reskinned one of the doors, so I took the old door skin and I cut my patches for the shaved door handles out of that, so it had the same bend on it as the rest of the door. So a bunch of stuff I had to repair. Once I got the whole car to the point where it was just about ready for paint, I'd been priming things as I went. Every time I worked on something, I primed it just to keep it from rusting. But once it was basically ready for real paint process, I had to face the facts that I was either going to hire someone to paint it or paint it myself. I wasn't really set up to paint it myself, but I wanted to paint it myself. So next thing was I built a paint booth in my garage. And here's just a short clip. I've got like 6 or 7 videos on building the paint booth. And I built my paint booth so that I have filtered air coming into the paint booth and filtered air leaving the paint booth. And I pressurize the paint booth. One thing I recommend is if you build your own paint booth, don't set yourself up so that you've got an electric fan sucking atomized lacquer-based paint through that fan, because it's a recipe for a fire or an explosion or something. I just didn't feel comfortable having paint, like liquid paint going through that fan. So I pressurized the paint booth with filtered air and filtered the air coming out of it. You'll see that in a little bit. So here's a little clip of some of it. So in the end, my paint booth worked out great. The next thing I did was I rolled the car in it, and I put a polyester primer on it. So this is like sprayable Bondo almost. The car looked like it was generally ready for paint before I did this. Then you spray this stuff on it, and it's kind of cool because the whole car is one color, but the texture of it is like an orange. So it's no longer a nice smooth car. You don't paint all the little nooks and crannies of the car with this. You're just painting the larger surfaces. Inside the door jambs don't get painted. A bunch of the stuff in the front of the car, it doesn't get painted. So you don't really want that product going in these little nooks and crannies. That's why you cover this up. It's just the big surfaces, the parts that are going to get blocked. So after you're done with that, you put a guide coat on it. And that's what this dark stuff is. And then you start blocking. If you haven't done that process, it's time consuming. It seems like it's never going to end. You got to be patient doing it. You don't want to overdo it. It's not a terribly aggressive form of sanding as far as what grits you're using, but it's necessary. You're using a big flat block to create big flat areas, even along something that's curved. Because even though this is curved, it's flat in this plane. So you're blocking like that. There's tons of video to show you how to block. I probably don't even do it right, but I blocked it all, and it worked out for me just fine. At the same time, I'm working on some other things on the engine. One of the things was my fuel rails. I've got a bunch of video on that. I'm really just showing this to show that I wasn't just working on one part of the car or another. I was working on several things at one time. My car originally had a returnless fuel system in it. By my car, I mean the engine, the 99 engine. And that wasn't going to work in my setup. I didn't want the computer controlling the fuel pump. I didn't want to install the module required for that to work. And it's not how I was setting up the car. Mine was much more old school. My fuel pump runs full speed all the time. It's in the fuel tank. It sends fuel into one of the driver's side fuel rail, out of that fuel rail into the passenger side fuel rail, out of that fuel rail into a fuel pressure regulator, and then back to the tank. So it's a circulating system. I just set the pressure in the regulator, and that's it. It's very simple, very foolproof. But this is a little clip of the fuel rails. All right, 99 Mustang Cobra has this fuel rail system. This is a returnless system. So fuel comes in. I found a place at Ross Racing. I found fuel rails at Ross Racing. This is an extrusion. It's an aluminum fuel rail, poles and test mortises, sort of. They're on the side, so not really mortise, but I did all these tests. And a couple things I discovered is definitely set the speed. Now I've got the fuel injectors stuck in there. Just set this in here. So that process of doing the fuel rails was kind of fun. I probably didn't need to do it. I think I could have purchased fuel rails from probably a number of places, but they're expensive and I wanted to do it just because it would be fun to do. After I finished blocking the car, I sprayed a 2K primer on it. So this is the last coat of stuff that goes on the car before it gets its final paint. And then this got sanded, and I think the very last step was maybe a red Scotch-Brite pad over everything. And the paint booth worked out really well. I would I would use it to store the car and to work in there. And then when I was ready to paint, I'd roll the car out, clean everything out of it, vacuum it all out, and then I'd take a hose and spray down everything and wash it out. And then I would wet it all down again right before I painted. So I'd wet it down, roll the car back in there, and close the doors and crank up the booth and start painting. And it was great. I didn't have any issues with dust or debris or whatever in my paint. It came out really good. So this is, when I backed the car in, or actually was getting ready to take it out to clean out the paint booth. And this is about at the end of my pictures. The next pictures are the painted car. And that's what it looked like the day I painted it. I sprayed about 3 coats of color on it and then 3 or 4 coats of clear. So I would go around with the color and, keep in mind at this point I had, the car all reassembled and had taped off everything that wasn't going to get painted, took the wheels off, put it up on jack stands, taped up the entire bottom of the car. Don't use plastic for this type of paint, use paper because the paint will peel off of it. Dry paint will peel off of a piece of plastic and get in your wet paint and it'll be a mess. But anyway, I go around with one round of color and let that flash, just take a few minutes, then color again, another few minutes, color again. Then I cleaned the gun and mixed up the clear and then went around with the first coat of clear. So no time, no sanding between anything, not much time between those coats, just enough time for the paint to flash. And in the end, it came out, in my opinion, just phenomenal. This is even before the car was cut and buffed, and it already looked great. I had a couple little issues with it, but it's okay. I can look people in the eye and say, yeah, but I painted it myself in my own garage, and it's the only car I've ever painted in my life. So I'm very, very happy being able to say that and with the way it came out. And then today, the car looks like this. This was out of Cars and Coffee, and I've made some changes. I've got a few videos on things. I've changed the oil pump. I've modified my cold air system. I told you I changed the mufflers. I've carpeted my trunk and made a battery box for the car. So I've done some things since I finished the car, but it is now, for the most part, finished. I'm still making little changes. Even today, I did a tiny little thing when I wired the car. There was this one wire that you hook to your door light switch. And I used Ron Francis Racing, their wiring system and their iStart system. So it's a keyless ignition. Just keep the key fob in your pocket. And it's like a modern car. You just touch the thing and it starts. And when you turn it off, the accessory power stays on for some period of time, like a modern car, until you open your door. Well, in my case, I didn't hook up the wire to tell it that the door is open because I thought, I'm not going to use that. And that just meant my accessory power would stay on for like 3 minutes and then finally shut off. So I fixed that today. My point is, I'm still doing things and tweaking it here and there. And but I drive it every day. It's a lot of fun. I've got big plans for it. Hoping to take the car over to Europe and do like a 100-hour trip all through Europe over the course of like 6 different weeks, where I go back and forth and I put the car in storage when I'm not there, and just enjoy it over in another country. But if you're looking to do something like this, just do it. Don't be afraid to do it. There's a ton of resources out there. If you have even a modicum of welding capability or mechanical aptitude, it's just going to get better and grow by going through this process. You almost can't mess it up. Anything you do, it's probably not going to be worse than what it was when you started. So you can always go back and fix it. And that was my experience. I had plenty of stuff I had to fix. But in the end, I'm really happy with it. The car's bulletproof. As I worked on it, I kept saying to myself, how do I fix this on the side of the road in France? And that's how I built it. Like something that can be worked on and fixed easily, and is just designed to be driven. So hope you enjoyed this. Look at some of my other videos if you want. You don't have to subscribe. I don't care about that at all. You don't have to comment. I don't care about that at all. I just put the videos out there for the fun of it. I don't even, at this point, have any tags in the videos, so you can't even search for them. The only way you'll find them is go to Craig's 66 Mustang, like search for that. And anyway, this is a lot of fun, so see you on the next one.